Well, morena. Greetings, everyone. I'm Rachel Trotman. I'm based in West Auckland and I run a consultancy called Weave. I've been in the evaluation field for about 15 years, but I've mostly learnt on the job, working alongside a range of community organisations, philanthropic funders, government agencies.
Kia ora koutou. Kia ora koutou. I'm Kate McKeag and I'm Hamilton based and I run an evaluation consultancy called the Knowledge Institute, and I'm also a member of the Connect group. I've been in the field for over 20 years and like Rachel have mostly learned on the job, working alongside community organisations as well as with government and with funders. So welcome to today.
Okay, so let's move into the slides. On our second slide here, this is what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to start by sharing what really impresses funders. We're going to explore what evidence is and some effective ways to gather it. We're going to look at how to tell a strong performance story. And then Kate will share an example from a group that she's worked with to evaluate a pilot program for young people. We're going to refer to the What Works website and helpful resources along the way. And when we finish, we'll show a 3-minute DVD on the What Works website while we gather your questions and select a few. So as Jan said, please send us your questions as we go through the methods that she shared. You don't need to write down what's on the slides because the slides and a copy of the webinar will be available on the Community Research and What Works website in a day or two. Okay, so when Kate and I reflected on what really impresses funders in terms of evidence and evaluation, 6 things stood out. The one that underpins them all is having a real commitment to capturing and sharing what you're doing. If you don't currently have this commitment, then your first step is to generate it and have a look at what's getting in the way. A lot hinges on the signals that your funders get about your commitment to evidence in your work, and they can tell. So some of the ways you can show this commitment is by being crystal clear on your purpose and communicating that really well, by asking questions that get to the heart of the difference you're trying to make, by making the effort to communicate the realities that you work with and what changes as a result of your efforts, by gathering really clear evidence of effectiveness and value. And funders also want to see a good story about what you do and the difference it makes. And we're going to have a look at each of these now. So we see again and again that it's passion that drives the community sector and the people who work in it. The challenge is to channel your passion to make a difference towards this key question. How do we really know what difference we make? And also, how can we do better? So to find that out, you need to make some time and invest some energy and resources. You need to ask yourselves that question. So Kate and I are offering a couple of frameworks or formulas today, and here's the first one. To show a real commitment to capturing and communicating your story, commit to capturing these things. This is our intent, your purpose and intent. Here's what we do, your activity. These are the questions that we ask ourselves. Here's the data that we generate to answer those questions. Here's how we analyse that data to create our evidence. And here's our story based on the evidence. Things to watch out for here are telling too big or long a story and claiming too much or too little in the way of impact or value.
Clarity of purpose. One of the things that we've learned along the way is that if funders can get what you're all about quickly, it makes a really big difference to how they view you. One of the things that we've found that people find really tough is being absolutely clear about the needs they're trying to address with their program or service. Often when we ask this question of people in the community or providers, people begin by talking to us about what they do, rather than what they're trying to address. So, for example, rather than saying we're providing training for young people, what funders want to hear is that we're focused on helping young people improve their literacy or self-esteem or job-seeking skills and know-how. These needs, having poor literacy or low self-esteem, can be easily flipped into the outcomes that you want to actually look at in evidence. So addressing the need of low levels of literacy becomes the outcome of improving literacy. Your rationale for doing what you're doing needs to be short, specific and clear. Who you are, why you exist and what you're trying to achieve. One of the other things that we've found impresses funders is if you can demonstrate you have a solid and in-depth understanding of the context you're working in. So you can explain simply, with backup of course, why your service or program is needed. For example, if you have a clear community demand for your service and the need can be backed up by others, you have the experience and expertise required to address the situation and you can demonstrate that you've got that, then this impresses funders about your clarity of purpose and that you really know what's going on. Now, some of the fishhooks here are balancing this clarity with the flexibility and fluidity that I know goes on in community organisations. You want to be clear, but at the same time there's always so much that we're trying to do out there, and not everything that we are doing is necessarily directly related to our funding. So it's a real balancing act, and sometimes that's tricky to get that right. The other one is discerning what's your best contribution. And one of the things that we find is that quite a lot of community organisations want to tell funders about everything that they do. And so that's one of the fishhooks in this area, is discerning your very best contribution and being really clear about the difference you're making for that particular thing. Rachel and I have worked with Rise Up Trust in South Auckland for a number of years, and they've developed an example of what they call their Navigational Chad to explain in simple and clear terms what their purpose and intent is. Now, this might be a bit blurry to lots of you out there, so I'll walk you through it. On the left-hand side are Rise Up's core beliefs and the reason they exist. The second column lists the activities that they do, or the what, these are the things that we're involved in. And the right-hand columns are the outcomes that they're hoping to make a difference to, with the most immediate ones being in the first column and the longer-term ones on the far right. This is a lovely example of being really clear and being able to demonstrate it in a simple way so people can see it in a snapshot. Here's a few other examples of what we would consider as unclear intent versus clearer intent. It's very common that government strategies or funding is directed to the kind of outcome that we see on the left-hand side, such as reducing obesity or healthy ageing. This doesn't mean that funders like to see you use that kind of intent in your own evaluations. This kind of intent is deliberately broad to allow for a range of different responses from communities and providers as they all contribute to this broader goal. What funders want to hear from you and what they want to see is that you are really clear about your intent. You know what outcome you can contribute to directly. You know the change that your service or program is designed to unlock. They want to see that you know the group of people for whom you're working with, and you know where you're going to be doing it. For example, in what sites and what places and where it is that you're actually going to be working. So you can see here that the intent of reducing obesity is considered reasonably unclear by a funder, even if it's actually the larger goal of a large strategy that they're funding. What they want to see from you is that you're really clear that your service is about increasing the rates of healthy body weight in Hamiltonians aged 10 to 60.
Okay, so asking and answering great questions is the essence of evaluation. It's about focused inquiry, but it's also an art. One of the secrets is to have just a few good ones, not ask everything. Have a few that everyone understands. To get to those questions, it's great to ask your funders, your participants, your team, stakeholders, what do we really need to know? What do they want to know? What does evidence and success look like to them? And what would convince them of effectiveness, value, and impact? So here's another little framework. When you're forming your questions, evaluation questions, make sure they address these 4 things. what you did, how well you did it, how effective you were and what changed for whom, and what you have learnt. And there's more about how to get your questions right on the What Works site. Things to watch out for here include asking too many or few questions and framing them vaguely or loosely. Funders tend to be a long way from your reality, so great evidence and evaluation shows it to them. So think about literally holding up a mirror to the work you do and the world you operate in. What would your funders see, feel and hear? It's great to try and make the voices and the worlds of the environments and people you work with really come alive. As well as insight into your world, your funders also want your insights on what works and makes a difference. So there's examples here that you can look at later. The LifeWise example shares short written stories about individuals who share their journey and some of the changes they've experienced through LifeWise. The Rise Up example shows a really powerful short DVD story of a whānau that they worked with and the changes that occurred for them as a result. The Vision West is also a DVD story about who they are, their intent, what they do and why, and the difference it makes. So giving a really authentic, balanced picture is the challenge here. So watch out for oversimplifying and distorting.
So what is evidence? There are all kinds of evidence, and in our experience, funders like a few numbers that tell them what you do, how much, with whom, and combine this with stories about how well you've done it and what difference you're making. If you have quantitative measures or data that evidences your outcomes as well, that will also be welcomed by funders. But for many of the services and programs that we work with, ensuring that you have high quality quantitative data on outcomes is really hard and often expensive to do and has many pitfalls. So that's why actually many funders are impressed if you've just got some numbers about a few things about what you do and that you can add to that with some qualitative stories. We've also found that if you can demonstrate your practice is grounded in an evidence base, for example, a therapeutic model or Māori models of care or educational theories and models, for example, then funders are likely to take you a lot more seriously. The trick is to focus on the key types of evidence that will answer a few questions really well. What we've found is it's important for you to focus on a small number of good questions that will focus your data needs and the kind of evidence you might collect. The RBA framework is one many of you will already be familiar with, and we think it's a good place to start when you're developing your evidence base. And certainly government funders like it. We think it's important to know the limitations of the framework, and the link on the page takes you to a list of RBA's limitations. And because of this, it's important that you don't necessarily limit yourselves to the RBA framing only. You'll see that we've had an extra question about learning at the end. So the kind of evidence that impresses funders is the stuff that answers your questions, that focuses on those questions, and that's engaging. So visual sources are also important, impact stories, etc. So there are some lovely examples on the What Works website. If you follow the link that's on this slide, to the kinds of methods and tools and techniques that can add to your evidence base. What makes evidence robust? Well, one of the most important things to do is to answer your questions. So if your question is, how well did we deliver the program or service, you need to be able to answer this directly. For example, overall, the program delivery was very sound, as evidenced by the high rates of retention, with over 95% of young people enrolling and remaining on the program to the end. And positive feedback from our expert panel about the content and design of the program, and the positive reviews by whānau and the young people participating. Staff feedback indicated that there are some areas for improvement that have been addressed and are now in the operational plan. You'll note in this example that I've given, there are multiple sources of data and a range of perspectives, and that's what makes our evidence base really robust. There are some numbers about attendance as well as some more qualitative feedback from expert stakeholders, whānau and participants, as well as from staff. So evidence comes in all forms, both qualitative and quantitative, and it can be more formally measured or less so. For example, stories in the media, feedback given to staff or others at a hui, or on the street can also be considered data or evidence. What makes it really count is that you've noted it down somewhere, and it's not just in your head. And the other thing is to make sure that you have a range of perspectives on answering that key question. This slide provides examples of the range of evidence you might consider using the framework that Rachel and I began with. So the link at the top of the table takes you to the What Works website, where you'll find lots of advice about choosing the right kind of data or tools or indicators that make up the evidence for your program or service. So back to the table, the left-hand column lists the questions you might ask at each stage of the framework we introduced earlier. The second column describes the kind of evidence you'll need to answer the question. For example, when you're getting evidence about your intent, we've suggested you'll need to be able to demonstrate a solid understanding of the needs you're trying to address, of the issues that might impact the people you're working with, as well as the kinds of change you're hoping to make. The example column, which is the third column, gives you a very brief example of the kind of thing you'd want to be able to say to a funder. So, for example, a certain percentage of people experience the issue that we're working with, or the research literature indicates that this is a really important need that needs to be addressed in our community, or our clients and community are indicating that they have a strong demand for the service. So, and then at the very end there, excuse me, what we've listed is some common tools that might be used. For example, when looking for evidence about the needs and the context of your service, there are many statistics available. So you might try council websites or Stats New Zealand, for example. They've got lots of data and can be very helpful trying to sort out what data you might access. You might also consider a literature review by someone you know with those kinds of skills. A literature review can be a great summary of the key issues for you, and you can have it for a very long time, and it can continually feed into your evidence base. You might also have evidence directly from your community or client group about their needs and the demand they have for your event, for your service or program. So all of these things are important. I'm not going to run through the other columns, but you can access this table tomorrow when this is posted on the website.
Okay, so the elements shown in red here can provide the framework for your story that you tell funders. Key elements of a great performance story are keeping it short, simple and clear, covering these things in red, your intent and activity, answering your key questions through clear evidence, showing how you have gauged success, your criteria for that, including case studies and stories, and making as much of your information as visual as possible, and we'll give examples of this in a minute. Very few people want a long written document these days, so experiment with how you communicate your findings. Try a summary sheet, a PowerPoint, a table of key findings, or a photo story. See the What Works site for ideas on this. So here's an example of a performance story from Rise Up Trust. Apologies if this is a bit blurry, I'll just quickly run through it. Rise Up Trust is based in South Auckland. It began as a homeschooling program on Saturdays in one person's garage and now operates a partnership school. So Rise Up invested about $2,000 on this 2-page infographic. They've used it in a variety of settings and it certainly impressed their funders. They've had a lot of great feedback from this. So the first page addresses who and what Rise Up is, their purpose and rationale, their activities, what they do, and the resource invested in them. This picture that they use of a family before and after their experience with Rise Up is a really great way to sum up what they're seeking to achieve. This second page shares their values, approach, and results so far. There's some bar charts in the middle there which show positive shifts in school report data. At the bottom left, they've summarised the numbers of programs they've run and who they've worked with, children and families. Above that is their value proposition, what makes them unique. And in the middle there, they've presented their findings in terms of the outcomes that they've achieved so far in a nutshell. You can see that the people they work with are at the centre. All of the pictures are of children and families, so the visuals reinforce their intent. And RiseUp's really clear that research and evaluation are key parts of successful organisations. They've focused here on the evidence that funders most want to see and on showing their information visually.
This next example is an evaluation for a program in Horowhenua run by Whaioro Trust. I worked alongside the staff and management of the program to undertake this evaluation, and feedback has been very positive from their funder. Through a colleague's referral, I was asked by the manager of the trust to help them with their evaluation. Because the manager trusted the person who referred me, she was very happy to work with me. Trust in your evaluator is a key part of what makes evaluation work. Having someone you trust work with you that you feel confident can listen, see and hear what it is you're trying to achieve and help you document this in a way that is authentic and meaningful to you as well as funders is really important. The trust is such a vital part, and it might seem like a small, but it's a vital part of all evaluation. Like this evaluation, Mahi Tukaha is a program that was part of the social sector trial, and yet they only had a very small budget for evaluation. I imagine some of you have even smaller budgets than this. So one of the ways that we dealt with this was to make this a truly participative evaluation. As a consultant, I couldn't do all the work. We were going to have to work together to get this done. So by using the framework we outlined earlier, that very first framework, together in a full day hui, we worked our way through each of the steps. First, the staff and management introduced me to the program, its context and its purpose. They showed me their program curriculum documentation that included the many models, theories and philosophies that underpins the design of the program. I was then able to summarise this in the report, as the slide demonstrates, in a way that gave the funder assurance about the evidence-based practice that's embedded in the program design. The second step was to focus on the key evaluation questions we thought were most important for the funder. We settled on 3. These focus on the quality of delivery and the extent and value of the change the program is trying to achieve, and the learnings for the future adaptation and ongoing development of the program. Together, we drew out the success criteria. In other words, if the program was delivered well, what would we see? I asked them what their bottom lines might be, if they wanted to call the program high quality or highly effective. Together, we developed a set of criteria that we could use for determining the soundness of the program and the quality and value of its delivery and impact. This slide summarises the criteria that we drew out at our hui together. These then became the focus of the gathering of data and evidence to see whether the program could hand on heart point to the evidence and claim these things were in place in their program. So this might be really little writing for you. So for example, in the program fundamentals column, the first criteria says the program content, design and structure draws from well-evidenced theory. So we were able to then search for the data and the evidence that might point to that being so for this program. We were, as the first slide evidenced, we actually were able to point to a whole range of models of practice that influence and were embedded in the design of the program. We made sure we searched for more than just one source of data for each of these criteria, because it's important to have more than one source of data if you can, as the next slide shows. There were already many sources of data available to the program. They were already collecting lots of data, and as you'll see on this slide, we used multiple sources of data to draw the judgments about the quality and effectiveness of the program. We used program management and administrative data. We used feedback from schools, feedback from families, feedback from the young people themselves, and feedback from staff in the program. Some of the data wasn't quite as well documented as it could have been, and so I worked with Mahi Tukaha and Whaioro to document that in a way that could be easily represented in a report. But we sorted through many different sources of data to be able to evidence the quality and value of this program and to answer those 3 key questions. In a nutshell, we were able to tell a story that answered the 3 questions in an engaging way. We were able to, with our evidence, be able to claim that the program content, design and structure was robust and grounded in evidence. The evidence pointed to the delivery being highly engaging and responsive to the needs of the young people participating. The evidence pointed to young people participating shifts in belief, new skills, and making positive changes that were actually evident to others. There is also a strong demand from schools for the program to continue, and there were a set of findings on insights from the pilot for the future that we included in our final report.
So, in summary, here's how you can amaze your funders with watertight evidence. Number 1, commit to doing it. Identify what you have and what you need to do it well. Also, talk to your funders about the support you need to meet their expectations around evidence and effectiveness. If you don't have that conversation, they can't support you as well as you might need. Make your intent and what you do really clear. Try and shine a light on the world that you operate in. Have a few great questions. Collect data that answers them. Have criteria to evaluate success. Then analyse your data to provide your evidence. And then finally, tell an engaging story based on that evidence. So that's the end of our presentation. We'll now show the 3-minute DVD on the What Works site while we gather and select several questions. It might just take a few seconds to load the DVD. Please keep sending that question. Sorry.
That's me jumping in. Thanks so much, Kate and Rachel. And as Rachel says, we will in a moment we're going to play a DVD to you, a video to you. We're going to record today's session. We understand a few people have had difficulty logging on. So if that happens to be someone that you know or you've heard about, we're going to record today's session and we'll make sure that the recording is available straight away after the event to everyone who's subscribed for today. In a moment, I'm going to be putting questions to our presenters. So now's the time to text us with a question, and we've put that number into your feed, so 021-821-850. You can tweet us a question, and if you're logged onto Google+, you can send a question that way. And don't forget that you can sign up for a follow-up workshop with Rachel once your evaluation forms come through. Now, a few people have managed to join us by route of the producer's link. So if you happen to be Kerry, Linda, Fiona, or Garth, do stay muted. Keep your mic muted. And now we're going to play a 2-minute video, which will tell you more about the What Works website and what you can find there. And afterwards, Kate and Rachel will take your questions.
Welcome to What Works. This website can help you figure out what difference you and your organization are making. Take TUI, for example. TUI is currently under some pressure, swirling in questions, challenging his organization's very existence. Are we making a difference for the people we serve? Could we be more effective? How can we show real results? TUI's organization runs a program designed to help unemployed young people develop work skills. Now TUI's being asked to prove that what they're doing is helping, but he doesn't really know how to go about it. What Works has a series of tools designed to make this easier. You're one step ahead of TUI, given you've been introduced to us already. Our homepage contains some useful information to help you begin. The Consider tab is a good place to get some basic information about what evaluation is and how to do it properly. When it comes to proving that what you're doing is having impact, you need to walk through some basic steps. The Get Started tab contains a number of resources to help you formulate a good evaluation plan, from defining what you need to evaluate to making sure the findings get used. Now that TUI has identified what he needs to know, he can move on to choosing some data gathering and evaluation tools. The Tools tab is divided into 2 sections. The first is designed to help you choose the right framework or approach. The Methods, Tools, Techniques section contains the different ways of collecting data. TUI's stuck for where to go next and needs help to choose the right tool. To help with that, we have a handy Tools and Approaches matrix, which contains an overview of popular tools and approaches that can be filtered in various ways. TUI thinks he's found a good framework and toolset that matches his organization's evaluation plan, but we'll have a bit of a look through the various case studies under the Stories tab first. It contains a selection of user stories about organizations' experiences using particular tools, so you can see what has worked for them. We're always looking for new stories. If you have an example to share, please contact Community Research. Tui can see organizations similar to his using the approach he picked, so he can see how it's going to work for him. With a good plan and tool set in place, Tui is well on the way to answering those original questions. Most importantly, Tui's organization will build good evidence about their outcomes and learn from the evidence gathered. What works best when organizations like Tui's share their experiences with the wider community so other groups can benefit from the information too. The Share tab contains guidance on becoming a learning organization and ways to share what you learn with others. There are tips on how to present your findings to service users, your board, funders, and the general public. Tui is going to take some more time to explore the website fully. We encourage you to take some time to have a look through the resources and see if they can help you with your work.
Kate and Rachel, I have some questions come through here in front of me, and there'll also be an opportunity for people to ask follow-up questions at the end of the event. A question here from Manu. He says, question from Manu here says, is it true that RBA stands for really boring analysis? But Kate, now I'm going to ask a really dumb question if you don't mind. This one's for you, Kate. Where do I actually start with all of this, Kate? So many types of evidence, and there's such a range of tools that I might possibly use. So if I'm a newcomer to this approach, how do I decide which is the right one for me? Focus groups, narratives? How do I decide which is going to be the tool that works for me?
That's a great question, Jan. I guess one of the most important things is for your evidence, your choices about evidence, to be linked to answering your key questions. The most important thing to do is to make sure you've got your set of questions and just your short list of questions that you want to collect evidence for really sorted out. And then once you've got that, then you ask yourself what kind of data and evidence is best for answering those questions. So you need to identify for each question whether there is any quantitative data that is possible, as well as what kind of qualitative data might be useful to bring that, to answer that question and bring it to life. Then look at who the evidence might come from. So for example, it might come from the participants in your program or your service. It might come from staff, it might come from statistics. So you need to look at where is this evidence and who is it going to come from. And then you look for the best method that's going to be able to collect that evidence. So very often we find people leap to a method, so they decide a survey is what they're going to do, before they've actually been through these preliminary steps, which is what's the question I'm answering, what kind of data is best to answer this question, who and where does this data come from, and then you need to look at what method will be best here. Do you need the depth of a one-on-one interview with somebody to get that real depth for an impact story, or do you need breadth? Do you need the breadth of a survey? So you need lots of responses to a few questions at a very high level. Or a photo is a really good idea to answer this particular question. Would a photo story be more interesting and bring it to life? It's a matter of asking yourself the question of what kind of data is necessary to best answer the question. So slide 12 gives you, a list of the kinds of types of evidence that funders like to see. And a question that we often say is, how do I convince my team that this is a good program and that this question, I've answered this question? So reflect the question back to yourself, to your own board, to your own staff, and say, if I put this mix of evidence together, would this convince them that my program had been high quality? Ask yourself those questions, and it's that working that through that gets you to the point of choosing the kind of tools that you might use. There's no one tool fits across the whole thing. There's no one right way of doing this. But if you can show that you have systematically thought through those series of questions, then you can usually be quite sure that the evidence you've collected will be the right evidence.
So Kate, I remember that you helped us when we were designing the What Works site. When we were designing the What Works site, I remember one of the things that you said to us was that we should design it in such a way that people shouldn't just jump in and pick a tool. So don't just jump in. The place to start is not the tool, is what I'm hearing you say. We have to stop and go back and first work out what it is. What are the questions that we're going to need to be able to answer? There isn't an obvious right tool, and we need to stop and do our thinking first. And I should imagine that's where you would particularly come in as evaluators as well in the work that you're doing with organizations like ours. Rachel, did you want to comment or respond on that at all?
No, I think Kate's responded to that.
Well then, let's stay with that topic. Organizations like ours, often we just don't have money for this. You know, often there is no money, or there may be a little bit of money for professional assistance for an evaluator. What do we do? What are our options as you see them, Rachel? You've worked with dozens of organizations like our own. And how do you recommend we proceed if there's no cash at all or only a small amount?
Sure, and that is a huge issue for everyone out there. There's a number of things you can do. The first thing I would recommend is to keep it really lean. Make sure you only measure and report on what really matters, and make sure you know what really matters to the people that most matter, your funders, yourselves, your participants, the people who use your service. So make sure you understand especially what your funders want. Make sure you deliver that to them. Look at the strengths and the skills and the interests of the people on your team, your staff. See what capability you already have in-house to do this work. For what you don't have, and you also need to identify that, seek out free or low-cost training or professional development opportunities. And there are quite a few out there if you look around. There's also a huge amount online. The What Works site is one place, but refers you to a lot of other sources. When we developed that site, we were really amazed just how much is out there for people to help them evaluate their work. Also, have a look at people who are doing this work really well. You might know of an organisation who has done a great performance story or who seems really good at attracting funding. Have a look at what they're doing, and if you know them well, you can actually do a trade with them, barter their skills with some of yours. You will be bound to offer something that they want, so do a swap around there, a bit of a trading scheme. I think it's important also to talk to your funders and negotiate with them for resources and funding and support to do this work. If they want this information, they need to understand that it does take time, resources and energy, and they need to be prepared to support that as well. Also, as you go along, you find methods that really work for you. Use those and keep the writing and the frequency of reporting as lean as you can when you're negotiating with funders. It's also good to have a look out there and try and find an evaluator that you connect with, that you trust, as Kate says, who really gets what you do, that you can work well with. And there are also sources of funding out there for you to work with those people. The Ministry of Social Development, I think, still has funding available through the Capability Mentoring Scheme till the end of June this year. But there's also other sources of funding out there. And just working in depth with one person that you really connect with can take you a long way in this area.
May I ask you a follow-up question on that, Rachel?
Sure.
So, pretty good lead there for if we're sort of doing it on our own, and you've and actually a supplementary there as well. Well, I mean, you've got to talk to other organisations and to find out what their experiences are for using certain tools and approaches. And of course, one way that you can do that is to have a look on the What Works website. We deliberately, didn't we? We gathered some case studies there of organisations who are using different tools and what their experience is in place to find out about the tools that other groups are using. So you've given us some good steer for if we really no money at all and we have to do. We all know of the model where you get a professional evaluator or professional external assistants to come in. It's an in-between there, and if we only have a small amount of money and we just need sort of very lean assistance from external people, that's a good approach there.
Right, so how do you prioritise where you put your resources if you don't have many? I would say two things there. One is around the design of your evaluation or your evidence gathering. Get some good support to get your questions right, and also to design how you're going to answer those questions. That would be the first thing. So some facilitation and some specific support around that. And secondly, if you don't have the skills in-house, I would look at getting some support around the presentation of your evidence and doing that in a really powerful, creative way. I mean, you may have someone's son or daughter who's very technically aware. You probably already have access to people who can present things well. Utilise your networks, but if I was going to spend some money, I would spend it on getting that front end right, getting your questions right, and the methods that you're going to use to generate the data to answer them. Do you want to add anything to that, Kate?
Yeah, I think I would agree with you, Rachel. I think that the middle ground isn't necessarily not seeking advice from an expert evaluator. In fact, what Rachel's saying is that it's actually the little pieces of advice at key moments as you're trying to develop this evidence base that's really important. So you might spend a little bit of your resource on getting some of that expert advice right up front, as Rachel said, and then draw on other resources for the doing of the actual data collection and the analysis and even the presentations, the beginning parts of the presentation. So it's being really careful about when it is that you pay for some of that expert advice so that you get the product that you're actually after. Yeah.
I'm thinking that what I might do is just quickly share a few screens as well for further resources that are available to people. I'm going to share a few screens now, and then we'll come back and put a couple more questions to you, if that's okay, Rachel and Kate. So we've been talking about where to go and who to go to. And coming up on your screen now, you'll see the website for ANZIA. This is an organisation that both Kate and Rachel are very much involved in, and this is the Australia-New Zealand Evaluators Association. So if you're somebody who wants to take their evaluation journey further, you can see that there's an upcoming conference in July, which is the ANZIA annual conference. And also on this website will be a growing resource that will be showing a searchable list of evaluators who may be able to help you with your work. We'll move on to the What Works website. There's been some presentation already around this, and we've seen the video about TUI. So the What Works website, I'll just repeat the domain name, whatworks.org.nz, was designed to be the sort of the first-stop shop and the one-stop shop for those who are wanting to engage with their outcomes thinking and their evaluation. So we all know that at the moment we're all increasingly feeling the heat from our funders. Our funders want good data and they want good evidence. And the What Works website has been designed as the place to start. Over the course of the next year, we'll be disseminating some of the content, the tools, the stories, and some expertise to accompany these resources through ongoing webinars. I'm just going to unmute now. If you just give me one moment. Thanks for that note. I was unmuted. Okay. Okay. And the third resource is the community research website, communityresearch.org.nz. And you'll remember that at the beginning of our webinar today, we said this is the place to sign up for e-news if you would like to receive information about future events such as this. So we're going to go back to a couple more questions now. At the beginning of our event today, Kate and Rachel, we had a question came through from the Sexual Assault Centre in the Bay of Plenty, and they wanted to know if you've got any advice for them on how to make visible and create profile for the really sensitive data, the under the radar data, and if you've got any guidance for them. I'm aware that my camera hasn't been up, but hopefully you've been able to hear that question, and I'm going to pass back to Rachel and Kate. Any advice for people who are dealing with very sensitive data? Have you come across this at all, and how did you handle this?
I guess one of the things that I would say to Babe Plenty is that, again, it's about working through what are the questions that you actually want to answer and what's the kind of profile that you want to be able to create with your evidence. So it may be that you are collecting really, really sensitive data, but it's not necessarily all that data that you're going to put out there as part of your profile. There are a range of ways that you might actually think about how you can communicate the effectiveness of what you're doing. Again, a careful thought. There's no off-the-shelf solution to that kind of thing, and there's absolutely no way that you would present really, really sensitive data that you've given assurances of anonymity or confidentiality to clients. So you do have to think creatively about how to tell a performance story when you have that kind of data. So ask for some help at the front end again, ask for some support. It is possible, but again, it's about tailoring it to your situation and making sure that the story you want to tell is authentic.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, one of the things I've seen used really well in that situation is a kind of a fictional impact story, which tells the story of you know, some of the people that you work with. It's anonymous, it's fictional, it's not identifying anyone, but it's taking people through the journey of what's going on. So that's journey mapping is another way to do that, where you're actually gathering stories of a whole bunch of people and identifying some common themes and some common pathways that people are experiencing, and you can present those as a kind of themed set of stories and journeys of the people that you're working with.
Thanks, you two. Those were really good questions. I love that, the fictional version of a real story. Rachel, that's a great answer. Thank you. So we're soon to close our webinar. I have one last question here, and we can quickly take some others, or we can respond by email if you've got any must-have burning questions for our presenters. And I've one final question for you, Rachel, if you don't mind. I might be convinced. Obviously, if I'm in the webinar already, here's my question for you, Rachel. Like, if we're in this webinar already, we're probably convinced of the value of evidence, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But how do I convince my team, how do I persuade my volunteer board members that this is important, it needs resourcing, and it's not a waste of money? Any steer for us there, Rachel?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I know most people struggle to engage their team and their board in this work. One of the ways you can start is just by asking your staff and your board to put themselves in the shoes of the people that you work with, and put themselves in the shoes of your funders by asking them these questions. So ask your team, how well do we present who we are, what we do, and what we're trying to achieve? How well do we get that across now? Ask them, why should anyone fund us or want what we offer? How are people attracted to what you present? How do they get there? And why would anyone want to fund you? Ask your team, how do our funders know we're worth investing in and what difference we make? And how do we know what difference we make? How do we know how we can do better? Those are really, they're big questions. And if you really look at those closely and be honest with yourselves, that will take you on a journey right there. So clearly, the main reason for doing this work is to be effective in the world, to make change. And you also want to be continually learning how to do better. So you want to know what's happening for the communities that you're working with. Are you really shifting things, or are you perpetuating the status quo, or even worse, doing harm? So what hard questions do you ask yourself about value quality and impact. So if you want to get out of struggle mode and become more self-determining and sustainable and attract investment, then you need to invest in evidence in your work and ask yourselves those questions. So basically I would just flip it back to people and ask them some of those and see if some lights come on around why this work is important.
Thank you, Rachel. That seems to me a really lovely way to conclude our Kōrero today. This is about getting out of struggle mode, and this is about taking the next steps and the bold steps towards becoming a learning organisation, becoming an organisation that can tell the story of its effectiveness, that has got its systems in place to ensure that we're doing no harm and to better understand what is working for us and what is making us effective. And I guess if we're using that well, that's not just for our funders, it's not just to amaze our funders, but it's in order to plough our learnings back into our everyday practice, our day-to-day practice, so that we're becoming more knowledgeable and that we're taking the journey into becoming learning organisations that take risks and that seek creativity and that seek to understand what works for us. I'm going to thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks for joining us on our webinar. Thank you to Kate and to Rachel, great friends of community research, and it's fantastic to have your expertise shared online today. Kate has to go. I know you've got a flight to rush to. Rachel's got a workshop to rush to. Busy evaluators. We're going to make a recording of today's event. We're also going to be in touch afterwards to let you know how you can sign up for a workshop with Rachel. And Kate and Rachel will be in touch with you soon as well to follow up. Bye-bye, Kate. Thanks for your time. Any questions, do get back to us. And don't forget to check out whatworks.org.nz, communityresearch.org.nz, and amzia.org.nz. So we'll look forward to staying in touch with you with details of our next webinar. Thanks for coming, everybody.